I'm starting this one off, and I'm starting because, Matthew, you have brought a guest, and I think that's great. I have
brought a guest.
Like, the guests kind of come to us, I've noticed. Like, we get the emails, would you like to have this guest? I've been able to bring a couple. This is the first one I think that you are entirely responsible for.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
And in fact, you're with the guest right now.
That's true.
I'm all by myself. Well, my dog's here. That's nice, but...
Right. It was weird when he emailed me, though, because I see him somewhat frequently in person, so I was like, why are you emailing me to be on the show? No. Yes, our guest today is the one and only Andrew McIntyre. Actually, I'm sure there are other Andrew McIntyres in the world, but...
I was going to say, McIntyre doesn't sound like it's that unusual of a last name.
It's not that uncommon.
Andrew and McIntyre wouldn't go together. I mean...
Yeah. So Andy is my brother-in-law, and if you've been listening to the show, dear listener, for more than one episode, this episode, then you'll have gotten the hints of the fact that one of my family members was joining the church. So naturally, I'm quite excited, and I've been blessed enough to be connected to your entrance into the church, and just kind of get to walk with you. As you made the decision and as you encountered Christ in the Catholic Church, I guess for the first time for real. And so I wanted to just take this opportunity to have you reflect on the journey, because you got confirmed yesterday. It has been under 24 hours. So I just want to take that opportunity to reflect for you. So I suppose we can start with the first question, which is, you grew up Christian. Right, so
that's a statement, Matt. That's not a question. That's a statement.
I'm getting there. You grew up Christian, and I've known you, essentially only as an adult, because I didn't know you as a child, and that's what that means to know you only as an adult. And I know.
Andrew, don't worry. There's a question in there somewhere. He's going to get to something. He's got a point. I'm sure of it.
Oh, he's used to this.
I'm familiar with this style of conversation.
And you let your sister marry him anyway.
Yeah. I was going to say, Matt, you had to have most of the responsibility getting Renee on the show.
Oh, yeah, I guess. Although I actually think Father Sam is the one who pitched it.
It was my idea. It was definitely my idea.
Yeah. That's great. I do think that Father pitched it.
By the way, she still owes us another episode.
I know, she does. 2.0. Renee Day 2.0. Yeah. Really kind of like 2.5, because 2.0 got erased somehow. It was for the better. Michael was there and just screamed the entire time.
It was awesome.
Yeah. Anyway, so you grew up Christian. So I just wanted to know about your Christian upbringing. Like, what was your relationship with Christ from year 5 to 15, 16,
Well... I had a pretty close relationship with Christ growing up, actually. From the time I was young, I was a regular vacation Bible school attendant in the summers. I mean, every Sunday at church. My parents ran the youth group at the church that we went to. So, and I would actively go on mission trips with them. And participate, obviously as best I could growing up. Usually I was just running around annoying the teenagers, trying to get them to play with me in the youth group, But as I developed into 5th, 6th, 7th grade, that time where you kind of start coming into your own as a thinker a little bit, and in your relationship with faith. I was actually at school, I was considered the Bible guy. I went to a public school, and I mean, I think a lot of it was, it was somewhat of an undercut, it was like a backhanded compliment, but regardless, everybody came to me with questions about the Bible and questions about what they should be doing, what decisions they should be making in certain situations. And I think, at least for a 7th grader, I think I was pretty good in my responses. At least good enough, I think, to entertain them enough to keep them coming back, but also give them at least the most accurate information I thought I could, based on Scripture. But Bible guy did not
get the girls.
Yeah, get the girls. Yeah, Bible guy was not as popular with the ladies. He was always friend zoned, and so it was.
I knew exactly where you were going.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it was not that. I guess that role, that social role, was getting less and less appealing the older I got. Really up once I hit high school. Once I became a freshman in high school, it was starting to get taxing, and I was getting involved in other things. And I was playing baseball a lot. I was really dedicated to making the high school baseball team, and I wanted to start on it. So when I get into something, I go pretty hard. And that's the way it was with my faith. I did the silver ring thing when I was.
What's that?
Father Sam, are you familiar with? Yeah,
No.
Maybe it's a Protestant thing. They go. It's like a tour. They go on tour, and it's about abstinence. And they ask you to, make a pledge to remain abstinent until you're married, and that you get a silver ring that you can wear.
It's a purity ring.
Yeah, purity ring.
Yeah.
Right. And so I did that. I brought one of my best friends along who was Catholic, and he went along with it when we did that. But I was, based on his tone, I was getting the impression that he was not really. He had no intentions of actually, holding to the promise, and it got progressively difficult as I got into high school to stay with anything, and eventually, I think being with a bunch of older high school kids on the baseball team, I ended up making the team, and getting more attention from all sorts of people as a result of that, and just the nature of how my friends were changing around me, and also the internet was really starting to pick up in popularity at this point, and so more and more content, just as you age in general, you get exposed to more and more content that is, that deforms your innocence.
So
but it is
like you're describing kind of a shift socially, which happens because we get older, and so you're starting to get exposed more to just the social dynamics of school, of friends, and things like that. And there's, from what I've read, I don't really know a whole lot about it from the Protestant side. I know something of it from the Catholic side, but in that sort of abstinence movement, there can be, I think sometimes on the Catholic side, we didn't do a great job explaining the virtue of chastity and how the virtue of, like, I remember growing up and going to like chastity talks, and it wasn't until I heard Jason Everett speak for the first time that I was like, here's somebody who's speaking about chastity as something more than abstinence. And I thought that was really interesting. But even then, like, to be honest, I heard early Jason Everett. I didn't even hear Jason Everett like more recently, where he really dives into
fully evolved Jason Everett.
Yeah, exactly. Where he's really gotten into some powerful stuff. And Kristalina, his wife too, the way that they share things. I mean, the first time I heard him, he was maybe 3 years older than me, and so it was a very different thing. It was like, hey, this guy's my age. It's really inspiring to hear that, but it was a little bit different from what I've heard in the Protestant circles. That silver ring tour thing that you're talking about is heavy on the abstinence, but not really strong on any kind of practicality, any kind of spirituality, or any kind of sense of here's the deep reasoning why the Christian faith has always proclaimed that abstinence outside of the context of marriage is what's called for. So there's nothing deeper there. It's sort of a don't do this, and I'm going to commit to not doing something. And that's kind of the end of the intellectual exercise. Then you start getting exposed to more stuff as you're going online, you're hearing more voices. Like, at what point would you say, Andrew, like, it became more than just the social, it also started to become an intellectual challenge for you?
Well, maybe I'm not giving myself, I was going to say I'm not giving myself enough credit if I say college. It was just pure social lust all through high school until I got to college and actually started to think. But not really. It was earlier than that. I think it became, honestly, it probably was around that same time in early high school where it became an intellectual challenge as well. I think specifically, I didn't have the words for it then, but sola scriptura. I was starting to ask questions about, or have questions about interpretation and why is this the interpretation, or why does one denomination believe that it's okay to have homosexual pastors, for example, and then we think that's wrong. Our denomination is still against that. How are we divided on an issue in the church? And so things like that started to arise. Back to the abstinence thing, intellectually or even spiritually, like you said, there was really not a spiritual appeal made.
Yeah.
And not that I really know whether or not I would have been able to handle or be or understand even an effective spiritual appeal as a 7th grade kid. I think my spiritual life was beginning. It was developing. I was enticed. I've told Matt this multiple times. I loved the Sermon on the Mount. I read it almost every day with a lot of regularity. And so it was based on it was based on principle. It was based on suggestion. It was based on do this. But there was also this, there was also this sense, at least for me, that it was, and abstinence was the same way, that it was your strength of will. It was like, this is on you. And it wasn't really presented as you need to offer this up to God. You can't do this without his help.
So in the area of chastity, I think a lot of times that's the approach that's taken when we try to teach people abstinence or just to be chaste. It's about like, you just got to like power through. And you've got to do it. But that has negative spiritual and emotional consequences in other places too, because it becomes sort of a sense of everything depends on me. And especially we're Americans, right? And that's the core of who we are as Americans. It all depends on me. And if everything's going to depend on me, then that means every virtue. It's not just about chastity. It means that patience, charity, everything is going to depend on my strength, my ability. So if I have any questions about my faith, that means that I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough for this faith, or I'm not faithful enough because I have a question or I have a doubt, and then I'm doing it wrong. And then we start to fall apart, because if it all depends on me, whether that's with a particular virtue that can very easily be manifested, or the lack of that virtue can very easily be manifested, or if it's something more like on a more subtle level, like we start to internalize that. Did you find yourself becoming entirely self-reliant as you were getting older because this message was kind of the thing that you had embraced early on?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, absolutely. I was gonna say as you were talking, I was like, wow, like fast forward to now, essentially. Yeah. Fast forward to about 6 months ago, before I started Exodus 90. I was in a state of spiritual desolation.
Yeah.
Because it had gotten to the point where I really started to get into Taoism.
Okay.
But I was experimenting with other Eastern religions and really for the bulk of my 20s, I was agnostic. I identified as agnostic, which I know.
How old are you now?
I'm 33 now. Yeah.
Jesus year.
Yes. Yeah. I said when I turned 33, which was in October, I was making the joke that this is either going to be my crucifixion year or my resurrection year. and
it was kind of both.
Yeah, I was going to say, why not both?
I guess you can't have one without the other.
Right on.
So, and that is what Renee said too. I think Renee was actually like, let's go with the resurrection here. But I was not finding strength in Eastern philosophy because of how much, and also modern narratives of self-reliance, but even just mindfulness and in some ways cognitive behavioral therapy, where it's about, where there's this implication that if you change your thinking, your relationship with your surroundings will change. Yeah. And the implication is you need to change. It's on you to change your thinking. It's on you to, the burden still falls on you to fix your life. In a very active, sense that I was like,
well, it's funny that you're bringing that up because, so I do a lot of work now with the Catholic Psych Institute that talks a lot about, sometimes cognitive behavioral therapy comes up, as does mindfulness. But in a Catholic context, mindfulness is like paying attention to your thoughts and emotions and the stuff that you're going through, knowing that God is present with you. And it becomes this very spiritual thing, recognizing the presence of God with you in all things. And then any of that sort of, I want to modify my behavior, comes with the integration of spirituality, the integration of a relationship with God. But so often, I think you're right, the reason that stuff falls short for us is because we've separated out the idea of the relationship with God. We've made the idea of a spirituality, that's a separate thing that I do on Sunday, or that's a separate thing that I do when I have prayer time. Everything else is everything else. It's in its own special category, Right. Even when, I would do yoga, I would go out into nature and try and spend time out there and meditate. And first of all, you're in charge of creating all that self-discipline. Right. There's no, unless you're there. I think there is actually in Pittsburgh one maybe Taoist / Buddhist institute church where you could go and maybe have like an organized spiritual experience with the community. But a lot of that stuff is hinged on, and this is no knock against, self-discipline. Self-discipline is very much a part of Catholicism too, and it's a part that I've connected with and enjoyed. Yeah, we support self-discipline here at the Tangent. We don't always have it, but we support it.
Right.
I think it's probably a good idea.
Yeah, self-control. It's good. It's good across the board. Yeah, but with the church, there is it's available. It's accessible. It's There's consistency, right? There is Sunday. There is a place to go on Sunday.
Yeah.
And so that was, I found that immediately helpful. But I want to take us back to, not just finding that time, but, I like that kind of, those physical, is that what we were talking about? Those kinds of physical things that you can connect to.
Yeah. Sure. Like having a place to go. It's huge.
Yeah, right. Having a place to go. And I would, and I would try and, incorporate that spiritual meditative practice into whatever activity I was doing. But you're still alone.
Yeah.
You're still alone out there.
Right.
In the wilderness, or you're still alone even when you're with people in the yoga studio. It's very much what's going on spiritually is hinged internally on your relationship to the breath, what your intention was coming in. And if my intention, well, if I forgot to set an intention, I would finish the yoga practice and I'd be like, idiot, I should have set an intention. That would have been so much more fruitful spiritually if I, would have been like, I would say the only maybe community related thing at the end of a yoga practice is that Om breath. But
not the same.
Not the same.
Yeah.
It's not the same. And it's certainly not the same as having a relationship with God that you're engaging with the whole time. Having that force that, you can say it's the universe, right? That I was doing that a lot. I found myself doing that a lot. I'm out here with the force of the universe in nature.
Yeah.
But that's all. I'm like, that's also just nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's the difference? I don't know.
So as all this stuff's happening for you, you start to experience gradually from, let's say from high school on. I mean, that might oversimplify it, but from high school on, sort of a drift away from some of those Christian roots that you had, and into a posture really of seeking, even though you were agnostic. So it's that, I don't know, which is actually a good place to be in many ways. To be able to say I don't know, but I'd like an answer is really healthy. Did you ever find that you were using I don't know as an excuse? So instead of actually looking for the answer, it was, well, I don't know, therefore I can do anything I want, or therefore I can go and just kind of be this way.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think culturally that's incredibly prevalent. Yeah. The I don't know is very much an excuse for, well, because we don't know, right? It will be pluralized. It's because we don't know. We should experiment with this.
Yeah.
We should try this thing. And as a result of that, it makes life so much more complicated.
Yeah.
Life became so much more difficult attempting to understand even what was right. What was okay, so if we don't know, then we should experiment with, one of the things that's very popular is polyamory right now. Is that lifestyle. But it's also one of those things that isn't there are I guess more texts out there on this practice increasingly as it gains popularity, or as it has gained popularity.
Can you define it real fast?
Polyamory is essentially an openness to multiple relationships with multiple romantic partners. It's hard to pin down in the sense that those relationships can be emotional relationships. Those relationships can be purely physical relationships.
Right.
They can be.
It's the concept of open marriage, kind of just, I guess, without the marriage necessarily.
Right. Exactly. It can be multiple. Living with multiple partners or multiple couples living together.
I see.
Definitely not a subject that comes up very often on The Tangent.
Yeah. Right,
so,
right.
I mean, congratulations, Andrew, for bringing up something that we've literally never talked about. Wow.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Thanks. I guess happy to. I don't know. At my own expense, I think happy to have dabbled in that, I suppose. I don't know. I can't say I've really dabbled in it because it never it just never seemed, it always just seemed way more complicated than it needed to be.
Yeah.
But even to engage the idea of it. So you engage the idea of it, you start thinking about it, and you go, wait a second, there's something about this that's unnecessarily complicated, or there's something about this that doesn't really seem to make sense, but you're seeing it. And do you ever wonder, as you're seeing these things, whether it's polyamory or other trends that are becoming more and more common, especially as people are disconnected from a life of faith?
Yeah.
Do you ever look at those things and say, am I the crazy one for not thinking that's a good idea? Am I the crazy one for wondering how this is supposed to work?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I was, and even as I've returned to the faith and have been, I mean, truly fully immersed in prayer and actively, I mean, I don't want to say to a fault, but almost like to a point where I want to be alone in prayer more than I want to be essentially doing anything else.
Yeah.
Sorry you're here.
Right. This is actually.
We appreciate you taking a break from that desire so that you can be with us to talk on this on this show. That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Thank you for respecting that. Acknowledging that. But even as I was doing that, I was still very much part of. I was still going to work in academia, in a very open-minded setting, and also working as a bar back at a bar, where many of my coworkers are living in alternative lifestyles. And saying to myself, oh man, like, being uncomfortable, not wanting to get found out, essentially, or not wanting to, and also wondering, and not wanting to get found out because I wouldn't want them to think that I was going crazy, that I was like losing it, because I was returning to something that, I mean, just felt so right, felt so good, and essential to my being, but was counter to,
like, the fundamental of their lifestyle.
Yeah. And yes, and also counter to how I had lived through my 20s, which was this agnosticism, but an intense agnosticism of always questioning, always putting out onto the table, maybe it is supposed to be this way. Maybe life is as open and complex and gray and uncertain as all of these practices encourage.
Yeah, but you're, having walked with you, right? This open-mindedness, I actually see how the Lord used it, right? Because there was a pretty definitive moment where you turned around and said, well, if I'm going to be open-minded, and I actually don't know exactly when this moment is, so I would love for that detail. But you said, if I'm going to be open-minded, I actually have to be truly open-minded, which means this like Christianity thing actually should be on the table. And so And so I see how, like, you're 100% correct in so far as the cultural agnosticism. It's almost like a counter creed. It's like if the church says we believe this thing, the culture says like we don't believe any of these things. We don't know anything. It's like the reverse creed.
Yeah.
But I see how the Lord used your willingness to at least investigate, because ultimately it led you to investigating, I guess, reinvestigating Christianity, but then investigating for the first time Catholicism.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
It's a good handoff there. I like that. It's real smooth. Real smooth, guys. You're getting it.
Yeah, that was a chunky.
We are sharing a mic.
That was a chunky handoff for sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really like that idea of a counter creed, because, well, and it made me think of and it's a culture of relativism, because of that. When you say we don't know about everything, or when we know nothing, essentially, which is so funny also considering that science is all about, it's also a culture that is hinged on scientific discovery and this certainty of knowing as proven by science that gets thrown in there too. That's a part of that. So it's like when it comes to religion and spirituality, we don't know anything about that. Yeah. That's all up in the air. When it comes to the truths of the universe, we're figuring each one of those out, one scientific discovery at a time, but yeah, that open-mindedness is what, when you brought up, Matt, that you were doing Exodus 90 again. We had talked about Exodus 90 last year when Matt did it, and I remember thinking to myself and talking to my girlfriend at the time, like, man, you don't have to do that to yourself to, that's a lot, and you shouldn't have to do that to yourself to have a spiritual relationship with, whatever that force is for you, and then a year later, essentially, I had broken up with my girlfriend, and the breakup was difficult, but it was also mutual, amicable. It was needed. We both agreed that it was just what we had to do. Mm-hmm. And so I was in a space where of doing a lot of my own self-discovery again, returning to try and get my life situated. And Matt was mentioned that he was doing Exodus 90 again, and I was like, oh yes, I absolutely need to do that to myself to get in touch with my own spirituality. Yeah. I mean, not so much just for the purpose of spirituality, but to return through asceticism to a life of smallness, a life of reduced clutter, these sort of even surface level things. And the concept of Catholicism was actually the most off-putting aspect of the process. I was like, you know what, I can muscle through the Catholicism aspect. I'll meditate. I had a workbook on your shadows, your shadow self. And so I was like, I'll do this workbook on my shadow self. I'll do personal meditation, and the Catholicism thing, I can talk to Matt about it as his anchor. We can certainly have those conversations, but
which we had been having for years.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but then once it started, I was like, it's pretty close-minded of me and in some ways like rude, to not engage with this religion too, to not engage with Catholicism as well. And also, through my 20s, there is, I realize in reflection that through my 20s, I was making an attempt to, each thing I encountered, I was making an attempt to unify people. I wanted to unify people in a way that made new ideas accessible to those who had differing ideas. Because I was raised Christian, I had a sense, at least, of where that group stood. And so I was like, okay, well, here's how like Taoism can connect to that. There are similarities.
How can I build a bridge here to this thing? How can I make it make sense? Yeah. All right.
Yes.
I want to hear more about Exodus 90, but before I get there, I got a couple of things that I just want to bring up. The first has nothing to do with anything that we're talking about. It has everything to do with Matt's shirt. So Matt, right now, the way that you are on my screen, it looks like Michael Scott is the other person in the conversation, like in that small window off to the bottom of the screen, like when you're doing a FaceTime call or something.
Yeah,
because of the fact that you've got a photograph of Michael and Dwight on your shirt. Michael Scott is in the bottom corner of my screen, and it just looks exactly like he's part of this call also. Which
he kind of is.
I think, well, spiritually, yeah. I think, because he's
in a Taoist kind of way. No, I'm kidding.
I mean, insofar as you and I have been deeply rooted in things like The Office, it's just like it's all there. So that was the first thing. I just need to point that out, that's happening. Okay. And then the second thought that I had, Andrew, as you're talking about this stuff. Sorry, I'm coming back to the point, and then I want to get off the point again because I eventually want you to come to Exodus 90. But before we get to that, I'm just thinking about as you're describing this open-mindedness and sort of questioning everything. It seems to me that there's only a few paths that can possibly come out of that kind of questioning, depending on what's going on. The aggressiveness with which you question either leads you to a kind of a laziness. So if everything's open to question, then I don't have to make any decisions about anything. And that's hedonism. Mm-hmm. And so that leads you to, I can just do whatever I want. I don't really have to think at all. So it becomes actually incurious. If you adopt the label agnostic, I'm not sure. As a result of that, I no longer have to worry about anything, so I can just do whatever I want, which leads you to hedonism, just seeking your own desires, right? Or you can get really aggressive with that questioning, and everything becomes a question, and then you're that really annoying guy at the bar who refuses to engage with any ideas. You just have to question everything, and so you're not really open to hearing the possibility of a solution. You just say, well, that's just your opinion, man, and you question everything, and you keep questioning everything so aggressively that nobody really wants to talk to you. And that leads you to nihilism, which is just, there's nothing. And that nihilism ultimately leads to utter despair, right?
Yes.
Or, and this, there might be other paths that could come out of this. I'm not seeing just yet, but like the other path is that you do exactly what you were talking about before. You start trying to make connections. You start trying to build a bridge between these new ideas and these things that seem to be contradictory, and you're actually engaging. And in that uncertainty, you start engaging different ideas and trying to figure out how they fit. And maybe you go back to your own background, or it leads you to a place where there are ideas that come together, where those questions are seriously engaged, which ultimately leads you actually to faith.
Right.
To something that says, in fact, there are answers to our questions, and our questions don't negate the fact that there are answers, nor do our questions separate us from being welcomed into that place where we can find an answer. So I'm seeing three paths to that radical questioning that you were engaging in, which is either hedonism, nihilism, or religion. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It makes so much sense because I probably tried each path. Yeah. I probably took some, I mean, not probably, I know I took some steps down each of those paths.
Man, I'm glad religion came last.
You know, Matt, we've got the title for the episode. It's Hedonism, Nihilism, and Andrew. You know?
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's great. Yeah, I think it's funny that you quoted The Big Lebowski. Because,
thank you. I'm so glad you noticed.
Yeah, well, I taught it at Duquesne. No. I teach English at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh,
okay.
and I for one of my classes taught a genre comparison where I had the students write. Write an essay comparing The Big Lebowski with a small collection of poems that I found by a poet named Honora Hillard, who wrote every poem incorporates a different Jeff Bridges character. Yeah. That's so cool. Yeah, it's a fantastic collection of poems. It's very funny, and it's also poignant, and there is dudeness throughout each poem, because I think dudeness is in some ways just Jeff Bridges' osity, and I would say that at that time, as I was teaching that was probably the height of my nihilism, it was probably the height of my nihilism, which is, I never identified as a nihilist. You watch The Big Lebowski one time and you can't identify as a nihilist. You're like, I can't be those guys,
right?
They're the wimpiest of the wimps, according to John Goodman. There's nothing to be afraid of when you're engaging with a nihilist. But I had to have been annoying to my students because they would want more definitive answers, or they would want less vagueness. Yeah. I think everything was just so vague.
It's supposed to be the other way around, though. The students are supposed to annoy the professor.
Yeah,
so
right.
Are you
exactly.
setting things right now? Or are we back on track?
Right. I was making up for a lot of making up for a lot of annoyance on their end.
So here's the other thing that I wanted to ask you about, right? Before we come back to Exodus 90, because I really do want to hear your experience with that. But before all that started, your sister started dating this Catholic guy.
Mm-hmm.
And what was it like for you to watch Renee and meet Matt, and then to see Renee herself move towards Catholicism and become Catholic? And what impact was that having on your own search and your own journey?
I think, I certainly loved it. I was not, I think when you're in that when you're in the headspace that I was in, there's always an avoidance of, for lack of a better term, an avoidance of extremes. Mm-hmm. So to commit to one thing is in some ways, in that mindset, a bit extreme. It's like, and so my thinking was, usually I'm happy that she feels strongly about something. I'm happy that I know it's hinged on goodness. The idea of goodness never disappeared from the search. And honestly, I don't think that it's something, aside from some Satanists that I know, and aside from that mindset, which is more hedonism even than, which is more an inclination towards hedonism in a lot of ways than pure evil, but that's another tangent.
Episode.
Yeah, that's a different episode. I was happy for her. I was loving it, but I also was like, wow, they were like really Catholic. I was like, I didn't really know that. So you're always on guard when you're in the mindset I was in. Again, you're always on guard for like culty behavior. You don't want that for anybody. So you're like, you're just like, man, that might be a bit much, but okay, whatever. They're doing their thing. It's not what I'm doing, And when we would get together and talk about, when we would all get together and I would talk to Matt about theology and his studies in theology, we would always have great conversations.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the time I would leave with maybe I think I just didn't have a very good understanding of theology. I didn't realize that theology was more hinged on the study of God. Yeah. I was under the impression that it was more a study of religion or religions. And I was like, man, they're really just hammering God home in this theology program. They're not really incorporating other religions. And I was put off by that because it felt limited. Yeah. But, I just really didn't know what theology was.
Well, because there's a different discipline for that called comparative religion, right? Like religious studies will get into like the looking at the different religions. Matt, for you, what were those theological conversations like? And how did you approach it?
I mean, so I think that I've joked about how with Renee, when we started dating, I tried to like hammer her over the head with Catholicism. And how that didn't work at all. And I think it's funny because I just had learned my lesson, basically. Which is like, you should be free to talk about these things, And so with Andy, it was just, if anything, I actually just like really appreciated his willingness to say like, well, what does this mean? Well, what does this mean? And so it would just basically turn into like kind of a Socratic dialogue, And so I loved having those conversations. And there was a while where I think the record was like anytime we hung out with Andrew, Renee didn't get to speak to him, and that like there was a point where she would say things to me like, I'm really grateful that you're having these conversations with him because you are capable of it in a way that like my other members and I aren't really capable of it, Yeah. But also I'd love to talk to him because it's been like a couple months. And you keep hogging all the Andrew time.
He's my brother.
And I would be like, hey, okay, fine. But I remember a distinct shift, really close to Exodus 90. So it can lead into that here.
You're a bridge builder, Matthew. Thank you.
I'm a bridge builder. But I remember a very distinct moment where I had really. And I think it was because I had just read Chesterton's Orthodoxy, right? So I was really feeling the term orthodoxy to describe Catholicism, right? And like the concept of orthodoxy. And I remember having a conversation with you about it. And you by the end of the conversation were like, I'm sold on orthodoxy. you were like, I'm in. Intellectually, I'm in on orthodoxy. Yeah. And I don't remember if you said, I don't want to do it, or like, it's just the practice or something like that, but I remember being like, oh, okay, that's great. This is great news that you are all in on orthodoxy. Meanwhile, I'm like, I don't even know if he really knows what orthodoxy means, but whatever, you're catching my drift through this conversation. So all in all, I mean, like as a holistic experience, it was awesome to get to like, I don't know, almost like increase my chops, like I was practicing. But also then it was cool because I did get to like progressively see you come around on ideas, But that, I think, led into Exodus 90, because I remember that conversation where you said, I'm all in on orthodoxy. That was somewhat close to Exodus 90. It might have been on the same trip, but it might not have been. Trip to Pittsburgh, that is, right? We come for holidays because we don't live in Pittsburgh. So it might have just been like a week or so beforehand. And then Exodus 90 became an option. But I would like to make a disclaimer here, which is that Exodus 90, like, I don't even think I asked Andrew to do it. Like, I'm pretty sure I just mentioned I was doing it, and he said to me, like, I'm going to do that with you. And my response was, you should. That sounds like a great idea.
Which is funny because he's always on the lookout for cultic behavior and everything. And Exodus 90 in Catholic circles is like, it's highly praised or people hate it. And so it's like, it's definitely got that sort of, there's a cult following to Exodus 90. There's people who are like, this is the way. And then there's it's a good practice. And so, all right, Andrew, tell me how you get into doing Exodus 90 and what was happening for you as you go through these 90 days of prayer, of discipline, fasting, and everything else.
Yeah. Well, yeah, leading up to Exodus 90, I had some of my buddies and I had done it was just an informal group text, but we were holding each other accountable for like a workout program. We did 100 push-ups. We called it 100s, and it was 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, 100 squats. And then I added a couple other things, a couple other exercises, because I was essentially, one of the things that I was doing in my state of spiritual desolation was just working out like crazy. And so I did really well in this with that accountability, and I was keeping the other guys motivated. Not, I'm not so much a hoorah type vocal leader, but just by example, And so after doing that, I was sort of craving something else too, a little bit more of that. And Exodus 90 had an aspect of that I was like, oh, like this is the ultimate test. I can do this, let's really see what I can do, And Matt was going through the stuff, and once he was telling me everything, and he's like, no cream in the coffee. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's cool. I can do that. He's like, only eat 3. He's like, no snacking between meals, and I'm like, I do that already. So I going in with some unspoken but internal arrogance for sure.
That's the best kind of arrogance. I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah, right. Yeah, if you're going to be arrogant, at least keep it to yourself. Yeah. So I was like, all right, let's give this a shot. And once I got started, it wasn't, I mean, the cold showers were the most terrifying thing for me of the process. I was like, I don't know if I can. That's what I kept saying. Maybe that'll be the thing I don't do. Throughout I had already immediately was tacking, not gonna do one of the disciplines, but once I got started, I don't necessarily know. Like I said, it was back to that idea of, if I'm going to be open-minded, I'm going to be open-minded. Yeah. I'm going to go all in on this. I'll just do the whole thing. And
so that led you to the prayer.
And so that's what led me to the prayer. I started listening to the reflections and started to actively pray. And Matt also said, and I didn't know how I was going to swing this really, but Matt also said, it doesn't work if you don't do the holy hour. He's like, Exodus 90 is essentially ineffective if you're not doing the holy hour. Yeah. And so I was like, well, I don't really believe in God. So I don't know how I'm going to do this holy hour, but I'll figure out some way,
Yeah.
I'll just sit in silence for an hour. And very quickly, that was not fruitful. It was, I didn't really know what I was feeling, so I was like, I'm just going to do the prayers.
Yeah.
I'm just going to start to pray. And originally, the first couple days, I was praying to the universe. I was praying to just a great force. But like I said, I was, and like you articulated really well, Father Sam, I was attempting to make connections. I'd been attempting to make connections between religions. I had a book that I still haven't read, but I wanted to get into.
It's nice to know that you have it, though.
Yeah, right. Nice to know that I have it. Yeah, I had every intention of reading it. It was called The Oneness Hypothesis, which there is an aspect of in Catholicism with the unity of the church, Christ's body, yeah. All of us pieces grafted onto the body of Christ, and so things like that type of thinking allowed me, I suppose, to be able to say, I'm going to address God now. I'm going to start praying to God and go with that. And about a week, I think it was the 11th day of Exodus 90, I had been praying to God for about a week, an hour a day. I never missed the holy hour.
Yeah.
I guess that's, that I'll some pride there, so good for me. I just,
no, good for you. That's
sinned.
Awesome.
yeah, right. But Matt said it was the most important part. So that was the thing I had to do. And praying for an hour a day for about 7 days. And then, around the 11th day, what I was doing was I did not have a Bible at my house. So the only scripture was the little bit of scripture that was included in the Exodus 90 reading. And then I was actually reading a book of poems because my master's degree is in poetry, and poetry, Matt can attest to this too. At one point in one of our conversations, I did say that I thought poetry was my religion, or essentially the closest thing that I had to a communication with God. And so I was reading this collection of 100 great Catholic poems that Matt and Renee had got me. And so I would read the poem, read the reflection on the poem, and then reflect. And that was the basis for a big chunk of my holy hour. And I was reading a poem called The Seafarer, written by an anonymous poet I can't remember now. It was either I think it's the 1700s. An anonymous sailor. And it was a beautiful poem, and it was a very direct meditation on this sailor's relationship with God. But it was spiritual and wise, and I had been, one of the things that in my state of spiritual desolation, so like I just mentioned, I had a master's degree in poetry. I had been writing poetry all through my 20s. I have a chapbook published on Amazon that I wouldn't include in the link below, just for the content. But so I was really immersed in poetry and pursuing a relationship, I think, seeking through that medium very actively. And then for just about the whole year leading up to my beginning Exodus 90, I was suddenly obsessed with surfing and stand-up paddleboarding. And I had always enjoyed, for years, I had a canoe. I would go out on the river.
And I mean, Pittsburgh is known for its waves. And
right.
The greater Pittsburgh area, and it's just killer surf, man.
Killer surf. Just gnarly, dude. Gnarly, like 6 inches, 6 inches,
That's when a boat goes by, right?
Yeah, that's when a boat goes by. Yeah, exactly. I would be on my stand-up paddleboard out on the river, and I would just look for boats. And and just do this over the wake.
Yeah, just sort of bob up and down.
Bob up and down over the wake. That was as close as I could get to surfing. But I was thinking about, before I was looking for a job actually on a river barge, because I was like, I'll be gone. I'll be gone for 2 weeks at a time. I'll be alone. I can write, or I'll be with a small crew, but I'll be on the water. I can write, and I'll reflect and meditate, whatever. And
you're taking the Mark Twain approach to a literary career. Yeah,
exactly. A Huck Finn, Tom Sawyer approach.
Which is great, because Mark Twain's from Connecticut, so there we go.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, perfect.
He hated Catholicism, but that's a whole other thing.
Yeah, we won't address that. We won't address that today.
If you're looking at Exodus 90 and seeing the holy hour as the most important part, did that in any way start to kind of scratch that itch that you had when it came to stuff like mindfulness or cognitive behavioral therapy, that there was something that was sort of missing there, that it's not just about the power of positive thinking? That's one piece of it. It's not just about decluttering your life. There's got to be something else there. And then Matt tells you the holy hour is the most important thing. And so you realize that all the discipline, all the stuff that you're going to go without, all the things that you're going to do, I can do the no snacks in between meals. I can do black coffee. I can do cold showers even if I don't want to do that. I can like grit my teeth and do it. And then all of a sudden the holy hour is presented as the most important part. Did that ever start to scratch that itch for integration that was there for you, that was leaving you dissatisfied with other things?
Oh yeah, yes. So that's eventually, and it was with that poem, it was with that Seafarer poem that I really had. I mean, I as I did that holy hour, finished that poem, I think the Holy Spirit came upon me in that during that holy hour. I mean, I burst into tears. I felt a rush of chills and had a strong physiological response to the realization that I had been seeking God the whole time. I had been seeking our God, this God the whole time, because it sort of, in some ways, I a lot of memories came back about my love of the Psalms, my love of Proverbs, which
poetry
and the inherent poetry, exactly, and the inherent poetic nature, to the way Jesus ministers, and then the language and the imagery of water, which I had made some connections to with Taoism, because water is a very prominent central image in Taoism. But I was like, poetry, and now I was essentially shaping my life towards water now. I was like moving away from poetry in ways, or with less emphasis, but moving towards water. And I was just like, no, dude. I was like, this is, I realized it wasn't about, because I would go out and paddleboard for hours. I would train to surf, and I was able to actually do some surfing. I went on a couple surf trips, and for 6 hours at a time, I would be out in the waves until the point where it was borderline dangerous. I was exhausted to the point where at one point I had to say, if I don't paddle in now, I might not be able to paddle back in. And so, but I was still not feeling anything. I was still not getting the satisfaction of that experience, of of beating myself basically into something. I don't know, And so I was like, okay. And when I made that connection, I realized this is the thing that God is the source of meaning in all of these activities, in all of these decisions. He's the founding principle. He's the rock from which to build the way I move forward in this process. And that dependence was reiterated over and over and over throughout Exodus 90. I mean, Exodus 90 is really good about, in a way that had never been presented to me before, about helping you understand that you aren't capable of really anything, but especially difficult things. True growth without having the reliance, the dependency, the connection, at the very least, with God.
Yeah. It's not about you alone, but it's about you in relationship. It's about you in relationship with the one who loves you the most and the most perfectly. Yeah. So how long from that experience in prayer to making the decision, I'm going to come into the Catholic Church and embrace the Catholic faith?
I don't know, maybe a month and a half or so. It was something that immediately, in that moment, felt okay. Well, it had reconnected me to my past faith, which that was, when I was young, that was really strong. And in a way that I felt like, okay, he's been calling me back. He's been, molding and shaping me this whole time and calling me back, Yeah. And so I was like, I'm back. Like, you got me. I'm in. I'm
doing this.
Back.
I'm ready to go.
I mean, I remember we would pray together over phone calls at the end of our anchor conversations. Yeah. And I remember when this happened, all of a sudden it was like I would pray, and then that day he prayed, and all of a sudden he was addressing Jesus. And I was like, whoa, what is going on right now? Yeah. And then within like a week, you started throwing in like, Lord, we love you. And I would be like, what is going on? And so just this like radical transformation over the course of like a week, but it was funny because I would also kind of like report back to Renee. and Renee would be like, how's it going? And I'd be like, well, he addressed God today. And she'd be like, what? And I'd be like, mm-hmm. And then like 3 days later, I'd be like, well, he addressed Jesus as Lord today. What? He told Jesus he loves him today. So Renee was getting like the play-by-play in the background. So cool. But radical transformation, like real quick too. Yeah. But it doesn't necessarily address when you went from, okay, you know what, you got me, I'm back, to Catholic Church. So continue with that.
Right. Yeah, I was still scared in some ways. You know, I still am not, you know, completely open about my faith at work. I did very quickly, in the spirit of, and I was always this way with my students, in the spirit of keeping my students always seeking. I very quickly started telling them, like, hey, you know, you can practice. This is an open classroom. You can practice whatever you want. This is a place for discussion, open discussion and thinking. But I will say that you know, and then I would say, for me, I have been agnostic for 10 years, but I am actually now really intrigued, really interested by the Catholic Church. And so I started to open up. I mean, in that scenario, I'm in a position of power, right? Yeah. So nobody's going to say, it's a safe space for me, especially. Nobody's going to be like, you're crazy, man. Or you know, come back at me with any criticism in any way.
Right.
So, but I basically took those types of baby steps in sharing what I was going through, what I was feeling, my experience, and gradually started to bring it up with people at work, and not even, you know, not proselytizing, just being myself.
Yeah.
I mean, so much of my experience as trying to be, as an agnostic, trying to be totally open and questioning was also a lot of suppression of my actual conscience. What actually felt morally right or just socially correct for me.
That's interesting.
It took a lot of suppression of that.
Yeah.
And so I was very familiar with suppressing what I was feeling and going through. And so when my faith started to deepen, I still struggled for a while with sharing that.
Yeah.
And the idea of joining the church was still, I was like, you know, that intellectually, that's obvious. It makes complete sense. I mean, why wouldn't I do that? I started attending Mass every Sunday because I realized, you know, it's an obligation.
Yeah.
That's an obligation of the faith. And that's also, it felt great to go. The first, you know, and also I was being hit with, after that, Matt and I, and some of our Exodus 90 fraternity brothers call them the HSTs, the Holy Spirit tingles, and the HHP, which is Holy Hour Power. And after that experience of HHP, where I got the HSTs, I was very quickly being steamrolled with providence, and just other moments of grace. And so the first time I was still resistant to attending Mass. I was just like, oh man, all right, I'm gonna do it. You know, I'm gonna get there. But I was like, I know I'll get there, just not this Sunday. Yeah. And the first Sunday Matt was like, you should go, dude. You should just go. And the first Sunday I did, the scripture reading was about when Christ
calls Andrew.
Yeah, Christ calls Andrew to follow him.
There we go.
And basically. I was like, yeah, essentially. Yeah. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me.
That's kind of direct to you, man.
Yeah.
Here we go, Andy. Let's go. Come on.
Yeah. Feels pretty direct. And
sometimes the Lord's poetic, and sometimes there's no subtlety at all. He's like, I'm going to punch you in the face. Let's go.
Right. Yeah. And I needed a good face punching. Yeah. I needed a good face punching. That was, and I had another experience where I have a cousin who was a very close caretaker of mine when I was a toddler, and she passed at a young age. And she was an English teacher, specifically sign language to the deaf in low income schools in Oklahoma, and she had an incredibly strong faith, and I'd written poems about her, and she plays a significant role in my family dynamic, I think, and that loss was a major loss for our family, and so I had talked to Matt about how you can pray to the dead in Catholicism, and I was like, well, that's pretty cool, So I was like, I'm going to pray. My cousin's name is Debbie, and I was like, I'm going to pray to Debbie, and maybe she has a hand in this. Maybe she's, at the very least, I'm going to pray for her soul. And worst, and then best case scenario, maybe she's still caring for me, there. And so I prayed, asking her for some clarity. I was praying I went into Exodus. One of my primary intentions was clarity, and vocational clarity, and professional guidance, direction. And I prayed to her asking if she was up there helping, up there involved, watching, and if she could give me a direct sign, I would really appreciate it. Don't have to, no big deal, not a test, but I was like, take your time with it. But if you could,
if it's not too much trouble for you, Deb, could we please get?
Yeah. Could
I don't want to put you out. I know you're busy.
Yeah, right, exactly. And a couple nights later, I was having trouble sleeping and was dozing in and out, But all of a sudden, a jazz tune popped into my head, and I was like, this is weird, I was like, but this is a good tune. I was like, this is a good tune. I'm not a musician, but I know some musicians. Maybe I can give it to them, give them a riff, or maybe I'll learn the saxophone one day or the trumpet and be able to play this. We'll see. I was like, but either way, all right, I'm gonna get up. And so I got up, I whistled it, and I whistled it into my phone so that I could, do something with it later. And that's the way artistic inspiration works. I've done that for poems several times. It seems like every time I'm ready to be done for the day, that's when I get an idea for a poem or something. Yeah. So I whistle this tune into my phone, and then I go to sleep. And I don't think it was the next day, but a couple mornings later, I was on my way to work. And because Exodus 90, one of the disciplines is listening to music that brings you closer to God, I was like, I hadn't been listening to my usual music. So I was like, I'm just going to I don't want to listen to Christian rock. I'm like, this was still early in the process. I'm like, I'm not listening to that. I'll just listen to jazz. I'm just going to listen to jazz. And so
they're really similar genres too,
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. it did the job of bringing me closer to God, at least. So I'm driving, and I put jazz on. I'm driving to work, and I'm getting close to work, and I'm like, wait a second. So I turn it up, and I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, this is the tune. This is the tune I whistled the other night into the phone. I was like, okay, all right. So I was like, all right, so it's already made. I guess I can.
I'm not an original, okay.
Yeah, right. Not hitting it big with that. So, but I parked my car, and I finished listening to the song before I went into work. And the DJ came on after the song ended, and he was like, okay, that was Debbie's Waltz by, so-and-so, whatever. And I was like, oh, man. I got the HSTs again, and this Holy Spirit tingles, and I was like, oh my gosh, all right, this just gets better and better. I was like, this is just getting better and better. It felt so good to have just yet more confirmation that I was thinking the right way, at the very least. That I was moving it forward in the right way. And so intellectually, like Matt said, when I had said I was convinced of orthodoxy, I think I was intellectually convinced of the way that orthodoxy simplifies the most important thing in life. I think that should be simple, which is your moral grounding, your spiritual foundation. Everything else is complicated. Everything else, and everything else can be complicated because it's emotional our emotions are hard to predict and really difficult to control. The external world, the professional world, is all over the place. I mean, you can get into an industry thinking that it's going to be solid, which I knew. I don't mean academia. Certainly, I don't mean that. But for example, computer science. Computer science was for the longest time was a very safe professional path. But now with AI, more and more of those jobs are disappearing as a result of using AI for programming.
So take the money route, the sure money route, and get a degree in poetry, right?
Right, exactly. Yes, right.
That's definitely the way.
Right. It was it was never about money for me, but I did not realize how little money actually there was. I knew there wouldn't be much, but I didn't realize how little. But
that's awesome.
Yeah, but so I was intellectually convinced, and then I was slowly becoming emotionally. I mean, not necessarily slowly, actually quite quickly. I mean, I joined the church within 5 months.
That's so cool. Well, I got really excited. So Matt started talking about this happening, and that you were doing Exodus 90 with him was a big deal, and he was really excited to tell me about it. That my brother-in-law is going to do Exodus 90 with me. Pray for him. So from a distance, I feel like I've been witness to a little bit of this. Like if Renee got the snapshot of what your prayer was like, I got the weekly or bi-weekly account of he's still doing Exodus 90, or he's been praying, or he's been asking a lot of questions, or these things are happening. So it's been really cool kind of praying for you in that time. Like, all right, Lord, whatever's happening, it's great. But then I forgot that we had this conversation, Matt, but you sent me the pictures from Andrew's confirmation yesterday, and the priest confirming you on Pentecost is my friend, Father Nick Vaskov, from seminary. I know Nick from back when we were in seminary together. And I was like, it was only seeing the picture that I realized, oh yeah, Matt told me about this, that Andy knew Father Nick. This is so cool. I love that man. I think he's great. I have nothing but fantastic memories of him as a seminarian, and just what a generous, gentle human being, and also I think a really brilliant guy. So tell me what it was like to work with Father Nick Vaskov as you're getting ready for your confirmation.
Yeah, it was wonderful, because I mean, everything you said. Yeah, he's so gentle. He's and I think that gentleness is, in some ways, the spiritual director for Exodus 90 was Father Boniface Hicks, who
friend of the show,
Father Boniface Hicks, yeah,
friend of the show, yeah, right. That's fantastic.
You've been on the same podcast as Father Boniface.
That is hilarious. That is hilarious. But his gentleness in spiritual direction, I really admired, and it felt so. It reminded me in a more in a more useful way, I suppose, for me, of the language of psychology that you often encounter in the mainstream. Gentleness with yourself, and giving yourself grace, and being patient with yourself, as you fail and things. But now that it had that spiritual emphasis, it actually was meaningful. It felt more, it had more depth to it, more strength to it than just like, you could use the same thing to justify hedonism, really. Like, you could say, be gentle with yourself. Yeah, like I just, committed adultery, but I'm just a guy,
Father Boniface does have a way of he weaves in something that's authentic. Like, I know that this is my emotional experience. I know that this is the way that I'm thinking. And then he brings it back to Christ, or he brings it back to, now bring that to God, offer that to the Lord. And you start to realize that all this stuff that could very easily just be me patting myself on the back or excusing everything, I actually have to bring to the Lord. And yeah, he's got that powerful way with him. But I want to know about Father Nick.
Yes, right.
Nothing against friend of the show, Father Boniface Hicks, but Father Nick Vaskov is the one. I want updates, man. How's he doing? He's like, he's just the greatest person. I think he's wonderful. I can't praise him enough.
Yeah. So meeting him in some ways reminded me of, it was just his gentleness, his approach to help answering my questions, and being patient with my tangents in some cases.
That's the show. That's the name of the show.
Yeah. Right there it is. He said it. We would meet once a week and talk for about an hour. It could have gone on a lot longer, but there would be moments where I was like, man, I feel bad. This is just, I'm getting free therapy or something. That was one of the things I said to Father Nick towards the end, one of our last conversations. I was just like, I can't thank you enough for you just meet with me once a week for an hour, and then I can go to church and stuff, and sing and meet with all these people, but it's all free. It's free. I was like, so I asked him, I was like, I would like to repay you in some way, and I was like, so we'll see, and so we're talking about ways I can get involved with the church, but more and things like that. But he is the pastor of, I think, in my parish, I'm not sure. I can't remember the number. He is the pastor of at least 6 churches in my parish, and they're all the downtown churches in Pittsburgh, which is really cool. I mean, they are some beautiful and historical churches in the Pittsburgh diocese, but also specifically in the Christ Our Savior parish, which is the parish that I joined, and he's the pastor of. But yeah, he's awesome. So there was one. He actually was a family friend of, or he was a friend of a family friend of mine that I don't know, through like is dating. I don't know. It seems like a closer connection than if I were to explain it in words.
Yeah, it's basically what it is because I don't know if you realize, when I met Father Nick, it had nothing to do with Andrew.
Oh,
it was I met Father Nick because Renee's childhood best friend is dating one of Father Nick's friends. And so it was, I met Father Nick, he happened to know you, Andrew joined Exodus 90, lo and behold, it was Father Nick's parish, and then it all came together, and it was like, oh my gosh.
That's so
How
cool.
did we all end up in the same circle?
Hey, man, the Catholic world is super small. The Catholic world is super small, and the more you dive into it, the more you realize how small it actually is. And it's really fun that way. And I'm sure that exists also in other areas, like in other aspects of people's lives. Certain professions have a very small world and everything, but there's something unique, I think, to the Catholic world where like there's not 6 degrees of separation in the Catholic world. There's 2.
Yeah,
like at most we might max out at 3 degrees of separation before you find somebody who knows somebody, and it's crazy. Like I was at Seek a couple years ago, and there's this guy named Travis who I know. He's from Connecticut, and if I would tell anybody at Seek that I was from Connecticut, inevitably they would tell me that they know like a relative of Travis, or they know Travis personally. Do I know him because he's also from Connecticut? And I was like, yeah, I know exactly who that is. You just you just ask anybody you meet from Connecticut if they know this other Catholic from Connecticut, and it's like, yeah, of course I know him.
Right, yeah. I mean, and it's even more incredible with this particular situation because like you went to seminary with him in Italy.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like the odds, of you having gone to a seminary in a foreign country.
But this is the thing. Like when you go to the NAC, you start to realize anywhere I go, I'm going to run into people who know a priest who I know. And so I told you about this, Matt, right? When I was back in February, I was in Rome for a week, had lunch at a restaurant, and there's an American couple sitting at the table next to us. And after we finished and walked out, they had finished and left the restaurant before us, but they were outside the restaurant. We walked out, and they said, "Father, do you study over here at the Gregorian?" I said, "I did a long time ago." We're from Wyoming. I said, "Do you know Father Steve Titus?" I'm like, "Yeah. He's a really good friend of ours." I'm like, "He's my classmate. I was in a band with him." Like, here's this Catholic world crashing. A couple from Wyoming meets 2 priests from the East Coast at a restaurant in Rome, and we know the same priest. Yeah, like crazy small world.
Yeah, that is a small world.
The one priest in Wyoming who I know is one of their very good friends. It's great.
Right. Yeah. It is. It's incredible. It's incredible. I mean.
Andy, tell me what it was like to be confirmed, like spiritually, emotionally. What were you feeling as you made that profession of faith in that public context and received the gift of the Holy Spirit in confirmation?
It was beautiful. In some ways, I was reflecting on this last night with my family. In some ways, it was like I wasn't detached necessarily, but it was as if I was, I don't know. I had been praying a lot going into it that the people that I invited there, who, several of whom are not active in their faith. They may be Catholic, but they're not actively, practicing, or they're questioning themselves, also questioning themselves. I had been praying a lot about their experience. I'd been praying a lot about what, in hopes that there would be fruit for them in attending.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, I think I was a little bit, maybe to a fault, concerned with what they were experiencing as it was happening. I had been, maybe it was also because I had been attending Mass so regularly. Not every day of the week, but a few times a week for so long. I already felt Catholic. I was there.
Yeah.
I was
I'm part of this.
Yeah, I'm in. I'm a part of this. I just want to start receiving. Yeah, I just want to start eating the bread. And also being able to go to confession. My first confession was maybe more of the experience of release and just overwhelming joy as the day went on after I confessed to Father Nick in his office, which was in some ways caught me off guard. I had quite a list. Accumulated of things to confess, and I was expecting to do it in the booth with him, not having to look him in the eyes. But that experience was incredible. But then, so I think the experience of the confirmation Mass wasn't as euphoric as maybe I would have liked it to be, but
it's real. It happens.
Yeah, but it's real. It happened, and it was wonderful. And the support that I did get from my friends who I wouldn't have expected to have as much support from, or as much enthusiasm from, felt wonderful. It was great that just the fact that they were there was beautiful. Yeah. And we did it at Old St. Patrick's Church in Pittsburgh, there's a replica of the Holy Steps, the Mercy Steps that you have to ascend on your knees, and that is what gets you to
basically the sanctuary.
Yeah, the sanctuary. The sanctuary is on the second floor, and it's really small. I went to Mass there. The reason that we did it there was because I went to Mass there on St. Patrick's Day during Exodus 90, and it was wall to wall. It was wall to wall, which is only about 100 people, and there's no instrumentation, so it was all vocals, and it felt like I was in the hull of a ship. The acoustics are it was like a sea shanty choir. I was in a sea shanty choir in college, and
of course you were.
yeah. Opened. You got to try everything, and so that brought me back, and I wanted my family members who are regular church attendees, I wanted them to have that kind of intimate experience, in hopes that it would be fruitful too.
That's so cool.
And Father Nick, it turns out, has an incredible singing voice.
The man is a fantastic musician, and he's an organist. He plays the accordion. He plays the tuba. The guy can do it all, and he's immensely talented, and he's a great chef too. The man can cook like you wouldn't believe. So
yes, he is. I've had some of his food.
Yeah, he could do just about everything. Good. Yeah. It was really fun, in seminary. So he's one of the largest people I've ever met in my life. We called him just Big Nick, right? And he would play the organ at Mass, and I was in the choir. So you'd be in the choir, and he'd play the organ, and one of the priests would come up to give us communion, and there was another guy who'd play the organ also, and so he would sit at the organ. There's Father Nick, then just Nick sitting at the organ playing, and you'd watch him playing, and his hands are so big. each finger is so massive that you're like, I don't know how he's got such incredible dexterity. And then you'd watch him play the accordion, and you're like, I don't know how this guy can hit those buttons with those hands like that. And he's just remarkable, right? So he'd do that. And the guy, to let him go to communion, he would just kind of hold a note, and another guy would come and sit on the bench next to him and then slide his hands under his on the chord that he was playing and pick up. And then Nick would get up and go and get communion, and then he'd come back and he'd lean over the guy and he'd put his hands down over the guy's hands. The guy would slide out from under him, and he was so big that you didn't notice anything happening. It was the smoothest transition you'd ever see, and it was just wild watching him do this.
Father, you've told this story on the Tangent before.
Have I really?
And I had no idea it was Father Nick.
Yeah. Yeah.
I knew that story.
Oh, yeah.
That's so funny that I've met him now.
And it was just like,
oh my gosh.
No, we still love it. He would come out and he would have stuff. He would get us. Somebody gave to the seminary like the Great American Songbook, but it was like the fake book for musicians and everything. And he would sit down in the student lounge and open it up, and he'd start playing. And it wasn't just like the Great American Songbook; it was like all kinds of just classic American songs. And he'd sit at the piano in the student lounge and start playing. And pretty soon he'd have like 30 guys standing around the piano scream singing whatever song it was that he was playing. Yeah. And he would just keep it going. And just when you'd think he's got to be tired, he must want to stop, he would just pull out another one somehow. It was amazing. He's a great guy. Anyway.
Yeah.
All right. So we got to wrap this up because it's been great talking with you, Andy, but I have to go.
Yeah.
Fair. I'm in charge of this one. I'm going.
Yeah, right.
No, it's so awesome to see you embracing this faith and taking this step, and I'm just really excited for you. Last thing, what advice would you give to anybody who's starting to have that questioning happening in their own heart, who's starting to do that seeking themselves?
I think the first thing that comes to my mind is dive right into prayer. Because, and I guess that could be more difficult for somebody who doesn't necessarily have the background that I had, or the childhood that I had. And I could see how that would be intimidating. But recently I heard a quote. It was actually through Exodus. It was Jake Kim was referencing the book called the 3 Stages of the Inner Life. And the quote was something along the lines of, the inner life is the inner dialogue that you have with yourself, that interior dialogue that you're always having every time you do something, and sometimes while you're doing something. And then the highest stage of that inner life is when that conversation, that internal conversation with yourself, becomes a conversation with God. And I think for somebody who might be new to prayer and here's that advice, dive right into it. It's really just offering that internal dialogue up to God, or taking that internal dialogue and allowing that idea of God, at the very least, whatever it is there, whatever you're starting to question, whatever you're starting to feel, allowing him into your internal dialogue in that way, and addressing him, with that internal dialogue, and that to me, as well as maybe the next advice I would give is find somebody who can talk to you, who also is practicing in the faith, who can give you that guidance. I mean, I'm so thankful that I had Matt. I mean, Matt's extensive extensive knowledge, as he pursues his masters, was huge for me to go to him with questions and doubts or concerns or skepticism or or aspects of Scripture, the use of language, the use of certain words in Scripture that didn't sit well with me or felt like they could be easily misinterpreted. I could to have that resource was not just the Scripture, and even not just the Catechism, although love the Catechism. That thing is sweet. But to have that personal resource, and then as you, the further you go along, you end up with somebody like Father Nick, and just more and more resources. Of course, they accumulate as you go on that journey.
Yeah.
But those two things, start with prayer. I think you can start with prayer, and then I think from there, God might will, in all likelihood, even guide you then to that spiritual voice, that other human voice that you might need.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, yeah, Andrew, congratulations.
Thank you.
It's so good. Thank God for your faith and for the steps that you're taking in it, and keep at it, persevere. Thanks for jumping on today. This is awesome.
Absolutely.
I'm really happy to meet
thanks
you.
For having me.
I've been hearing about you for a long time, so it's good to finally put a face with the name and everything and get to know you a little bit. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's great to meet you too. Yeah, thanks.
Right. Thanks, Father.
Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon. Peace.
See you next time. Peace. Hey, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you'd like to further support The Tangent, please consider subscribing or following on your preferred platform, following us at @thetangent_Catholic on Instagram, or even donating at veritascatholic.com. See you next time. God bless.